Before we move on today to percent applications, let's take one last look at percent of change. Do you remember we were talking about going from one number to the other? It could be an increase or decrease. We look at the numbers and we're going from 20 to 35. The numbers are going up, so I already know that I'm looking at a percent increase. The next thing I'm going to do is find the amount of change. So when I'm looking at percent change, I'm going to find the difference. I'm going to place that base number as my original or starting amount. I will simplify the top and I see that I have 15 over 20. We said we could set up a proportion. That would be x over 100 because I'm looking for percent, and percent is per 100. I would then cross multiply. I would divide by 20. See, they both have a 0. I can cancel that out. And I see that x is equal to 75% increase. Now, if you remember, last time I said that there were numbers compatible to 100, and 20 was on that list. So if your denominator here for your second term is compatible to 100 times 5 times 5, and I still get my 75%. Sometimes it could be just that easy. Second problem, I'm going from 50 to 32. My numbers are decreasing. This is a percent decrease. I find the change, 50 minus 32 over the starting or original amount. I have 18 over 50. What can I do to get changes to a percent? I have 18 over 50 is equal to x over 100. But wait, once again, before I cross multiply, I notice that this number is compatible. Times 2 times 2. It's a 36% decrease. Proportions always work, but sometimes we'll have that opportunity to do a little less work if it's compatible. One last problem before we move on. We're going to again find the change. Place that over the original. So the base number here is the original. Time to set up your proportion. Cross multiply. Divide. So we have a common amount of zeros. You can cross one out there. And I get 90. And it's 90%. And again, you might have noticed that this was compatible. Times 2 times 2, and there's your 90%. And your numbers were going down, so a 90% decrease. And we did well with this yesterday, but I just wanted to do a couple additional problems in case anyone wanted a review. Percent applications. We find percent in a lot of different places in everyday life, from our paying our taxes to receiving a discount to earning a commission, earning interest, and so many other areas. We're going to take a look at a couple of these applications, but before we do, let's talk a little bit about the different methods there are to solve percent problems. We can use mental math. We can set up a proportion, which we're very good at, and we can also set up a percent equation. Let's take a look at mental math. Finding 10% of a number is easy, and this mental math technique works with 10% and multiples of 10%. It doesn't work with 12% or 32% or 75%. It only works with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. So 10% right away says we're going to be taking that and dividing by 1/10, or multiplying by 1/10, I'm saying divide by 10, and we're going to move our decimal over one place. So 10% of a number just says move your decimal one place to the left. It's getting smaller. If I wanted to calculate 20% and not set up a proportion or an equation, I'm going to recall that I can break down a number into other parts, and I can say that this is actually 10% times 2. Well, if 10% is 3, well then 3 times 2 is 6. What if I wanted to find 40% of 30? Well, if this is 10% times 4, and 10% is 3, well, 3 times 4 is 12. Let's just do another one. And I can do this with any number, but the percent has to be a multiple of 10. So I chose 10, 20, 40. Let's do 70. 70% of 30. Well, we know 10% is 3. 3 times 7, 21. One or two more. What if I had 20% of 2,000? Well, 10% tells me to move my decimal over once, which is 200, and 200 times 2 would be 400. So we can do more of these in class, but I just wanted to give you a sample of how to do some mental math. Let's take a look at some word problems now. We can solve some word problems based on, well, actually, before we even get to the word problems, let's take a look at some of our changing or conversions. I want to be able to convert a percent to a fraction and a decimal. Let's start with the fractions. To convert 15% to a fraction, you take it and you place it over 100 because percent is per 100. So step 1, place number over 100, and then step 2 on that is to simplify. Divide by the GCF, which is 5. There you have your percent as a fraction. To change your percent to a decimal, you can realize that if I read this fraction here, it says 15 hundredths, and this is tenths hundredths. But basically what you're doing is you're dropping this sign and moving your decimal over two places because you're dividing by 100. So again, if I had 6%, I would drop the sign and move my decimal over two places. So if we need to, we can go over a little bit more of that in class as well. We talk about percent application, and let's just do one or two. Here's tax, and that, again, a lot of times when you're purchasing different items, you will be charged tax. So if you wanted to purchase a pair of boots, and that costs $99, and there is 7% tax. So you're going to be taking 99 and multiplying that by that 7%. So if I'm going to take this 7% and change it or convert to a decimal, drop the sign and move your decimal over two places because you're dividing by 100. So now I'm going to do a percent equation, 7% of. All right, so I'm going to take this 7%, multiply it by 99. That's going to give me the tax. All right, so that's going to tell me how much tax I'm going to pay. This is where you pull out your calculator. This is where you're not expected to do all the calculations in your head. You can, right? Perfectly fine if you'd like to, but I'm sure that many of you will say, can I just do it simpler? So I'm going to take my $99. I'm going to multiply it by that decimal form of the percent. And I'm going to find out that the tax is equal to $6.93. What's my final cost? Well, that means I'm going to take my $99 and I'm going to add the tax to that. So when you go to the register to pay, you're going to pay $105.93. So that's the form of tax. Commission is something that you earn based on amount of product that you sold or items that you sell. You could be a real estate agent selling homes, a car salesperson selling cars, someone at the jewelry counter in a high-end store, the clerk at the shoe store. Many of them are being paid by commission. So what happens is sometimes you have a base salary, other times it's just commission based, and we'll talk again a little more about that in person. Well, a car salesman earns 4% commission on all sales. This week they sold 2%, so this is important, 4%. The total of the amount of the two cars was $72,000. What's the commission earned? Okay, so again, I could, if I wanted to, set up a proportion, but these type of problems are easier to set up as an equation. We'll have that percent as a decimal again, and we're going to multiply that times the amount of sales. Once again, pull out your calculator, and this will be one of those lessons that I say, yes, calculators are permitted, and we'll take our 72,000 and multiply that times the 400ths, and we find out that the commission is $2,880, okay, for selling those two cars. And so that is what the salesperson earned. I can go into talking about other commission, talk about interest, and we'll get to those in class.